Nueces County is back to allowing in-person jail visitation for the first time in nearly a year. However, that visitation is being done under modified conditions because of COVID. The sheriff, J.C. Hooper, says the main jail and the annex resumed weekend jail visitations with about 100 visitors at the annex and about 186 at the main jail. It was in March of last year when the Texas Commission on Jail Standards prohibited all in-person visitation all across the state. The sheriff said they had to create a plan that would demonstrate they could host visitors safely and get that plan approved by the commission as well as the local health authority. He says visitation will include things like temperature checks, social distancing, and sanitizing the booths after each visit. The sheriff says visitation is something that is really critical for the mental health and wellness of the inmates.
It's been difficult for the inmates, and believe it or not, it's been even more difficult for the employees, because when you're dealing with an inmate population that has that taken away from them, it makes them challenging to handle.
By the way, you can find all the updated rules for jail visitation on the Nueces County website.